every morning I wake up and I wonder to myself, what business value am I building? What is my business value, right? And as I reflect and I realize business value is actually really hard, and I thought I'd give a talk to your, and I think this will resonate with you, whether you're in a startup, whether you're in an enterprise, whether you're a technologist or a executive leader. So, yes, business value is hard. And what does good look like, right? So recently we worked with some of the government agencies around using AI and serverless together to drive innovation, and it's actually looking really good, and I want to share that story with you. And hopefully out of that, we can derive some principles that you can take home kind of to your companies, to your executives, or if you're our executive, you can take it to your developers to drive this serverless state of mind. And just for fun, let's benchmark the cloud. The different clouds, they all have different offerings. How do they compete against each other? And at the end of the day, is it life beyond serverless, right? That's a question I'm asking, and let's see. So, business value is hard. Now, we all heard it throughout the talk today, is that serverless is about kind of driving value. Sometimes the value is non-determinate. Sometimes you have to make a hypothesis based on your strategy and based on your vision. Then you want to be able to focus on it using serverless technologies. And once you focus on it, you'll be able to deliver on that. But in reality, this is what really happens. You have a value stream, right? Going from your idea into production. But somewhere in between, there's a so-called wall of frustration. Because we solved the DevOps problem. We got the developers and operation people. We got dev and ops. They work together now. But the business is actually on the other side, right? So the customers have a problem. The customer want to say, hey, I want this new frictionless way of doing things. It's just too hard for me. I don't have time. And the data from the analyst saying, yes, our customer want frictionless onboarding. And then what happens is, your business executive go, hey, we'll just put it in the front door, right? We'll put it in the front door. And then the enterprise architect said, no, we got to be cloud agnostic. We got to write no code and have no data and be agnostic. And somewhere along the line, that customer value, that value proposition is actually lost. And in the meanwhile, most companies have an innovation hub. And what does the innovation hub do? It's like, we actually solve the problem in the POC, but we can't get it to production, right? Because we kind of hit that wall of frustration. And then somewhere along the line, the product owner is saying, oh, I've been waiting 2 years for this product, actually. So by the time it gets built, it's already 2 years behind, and the requirement's out of date. And on this other hand, we got developers and the operation people. And they have automation, they got infrastructure as code, they got serverless, they got Lambdas, they got containers to continuously deliver what, right? A lot of the kind of client side I go to, I ask the developers, I ask the operation people, I say, yes, you have automation, but what are you actually delivering? Oh, I don't actually know, the business. The business on the other side knows, but in fact, the business on the other side, they don't know either, right? And if you actually drill deep enough, you find that a lot of the folks on the engineering side, they've actually been with the company a long time. They understand value, they understand the business, right? But they just don't get a chance to kind of relate to the customer and kind of drive value all the way to the other side. And just out of interest, who feel like they're on the business side, right? You make decisions, you influence the technology. Anyone in the room? And who's more on the technology side? Yeah, cool. So as technologists, you probably try to drive some of the decision to your execs as well. And what I also see every now and then is that the executives are trying to drive serverless to the developers, right? The developer want to use something else. At the end of the day, everyone should just work together, right? Afterwards, we should all go to the pub and work together, right? So if we did work together, what would happen, right? This is a hard thing, right? I'm gonna power through this real quick because we all want to get to the benchmarks, right? That's what we're interested in. Value is not static, right? There's not a simple formula. Everybody talks about ROI, return on investment, but that's actually something that you worry about when you're still sustaining and you're optimizing, improving your product, right? If you want to start looking at new products, you got to look at the future value because that product is not made yet, right? If you're iterating on existing product, yes, you know the return on investment straight away, pretty much. But for future value, you need the net present value to discount the cash flow back to the present day because as time goes on, your money, the value actually deteriorates, so you need the discount factor to kind of discount back. And then on top of that, as you're kind of building new product, you want to know what options are available to you, right? As a visionary, you need to then start to look at what future options, what untapped markets I need to go into. And to measure that actually becomes a measure of option value, which is actually measuring the future value of the option, not the future value of the product. So this is very much from a growth perspective. And then how does that relate to your life cycle of your product? then you kind of then can take the Simon Wardley approach of going from, that pioneer approach where blue sky thinking, right? There's nothing out in the market. What should you build next, right? Make that into a product and then kind of commercialize, productionize it, industrialize it, and take the components from that and then iterate back. So this continuous innovation cycle is actually what every single business needs. And this is actually described in the innovation dilemma from Clayton Christensen around it's no longer enough to just sustain your business. You have to look to new markets, otherwise you'll be disrupted by the challenges, right? So there's actually a room for incumbents, large enterprises, to also become challengers themselves and disrupt themselves. So kind of talked about continuous innovation, talked about the fact that within the enterprise, you need to think about value at different levels. And to do that, really, it's up to the people. Let the best idea win, right? When it comes to continuous innovation, you need a lot of data, you need a lot of agility. It's also kind of, in this digital era, the customer actually places trust in your product based on the user experience, right? So if you have a more usable product, it could be as stable as the next product, but because you have a better user experience, they trust you. And lastly, it's kind of, what was I going to say? To actually disrupt yourself and disrupt new markets, you need an actual brand new business model, right? Sometimes you might have a more subscription-based pricing model, but then when it comes to new markets and new customer needs, you might need a more pay-per-use, right? So these factors make it very hard to actually kind of build business value across the organization. And let's see an example of what good looks like, or what good can look like. So this is an example of a piece of work we've done with the government sector to drive innovation into productization, into commercialization. I feel that, and Dennis will kind of be able to elaborate on more, is that within the government sector, there's actually a lot of very strong pockets of innovation, right? And I feel like it's probably because they probably don't have that many infrastructure people, right? So it's all about driving value for kind of taxpayers, for motorists, for consumers, for commuters. Very quickly, the whole strategy was actually not made by one person, right? There was no chief innovation officer who said, this is our strategy. Everything was crowdsourced. Everything came from the actual commuters, right? That was kind of broken down into what's called non-regrettable initiatives, which means that no matter, no one can predict the future, no matter which way the future technologies go, these non-regrettable initiatives will always build value for the organization. They can become a foundation for further innovation and further products. And based on that is where Contino came in. We focused on this one particular objective around building an intelligent network where it's managed by data and can drive better customer experience for people catching train, bus, ferry, light rail, and trains, right? Train, bus, ferry, light rail, metro. Metro is the other one. So instead of straight away jumping to tech, talking about Lambdas, talking about Fargate or SageMaker for prediction, we actually apply some design thinking, right? Think about the customer's customer. Our customer's customer is the customer of Transport New South Wales. And the customer is actually the operation people on the ground, right? They are managing the trains. They are managing the outages. Whenever there's an outage, how many people, how many buses they need to send to replace the trains. They are the executives, the customers who need to look at this visualization, be able to predict what's going to happen, and call for the appropriate operational response. So think about the design thinking, think about the problem at hand, think about the human factor, right? As kind of Sarah touched on, is that technology is there to serve humans and to empower humans, and let's think about that first. And then we can go into the serverless architecture, right? Working backwards, right, from the actual prototypes that we built around kind of visualization and predictions, and for the exec level, all the way down to the low-level operation folks. We looked at the data sources that we have. Hebe Dragons, there's a lot of bad data, there's a lot of dirty data, there's a lot of on-prem data that we had to fetch by FTP. Based on what the user needed and based on the constraints we have, we work out the most pragmatic kind of serverless architecture to actually enable that outcome. I think what's worth noting is that pretty much all of our ingestion logic is written using Lambdas, which are reusable, and we are also using AppSync to push the data out to the front end, as opposed to letting the front end pull, which is quite optimized in terms of resourcing. And using SageMaker and SageMaker models to kind of apply that data science aspect without us having to write the models, using out-of-the-box models from SageMaker, such as DeepAR. And then also applying data ops and ML ops to automatically deploy the models. So everything you see on this architecture is serverless, including the ML as well as the ML ops and data ops aspect. So just quickly recap, this is the journey. So talking about that whole evolution or that innovation, continuous innovation kind of cycle is that in the beginning, at the pioneer stage, based on the strategy and the objective, was a simple question of how many people on my network, right? Is it 100,000? Is it 10,000? What should I do? Is it peak hour traffic? Is it off-peak hour traffic? And then it's kind of working together with the product owners, with the data folks, with the analysts to actually figure out the real-time visualization, and then building the operation folks to actually be able to consume that information, because culturally they were not used to this, right? The fact that you have real-time information as opposed to nightly batches, which is actually what they're used to. Once that cycle is over, we kind of looked at the next question, which is, how about tomorrow, right? We know what's gonna happen now. Tell me about tomorrow. And that's when we got the data scientists on the client team involved to work with us together and to build out the models. And it's actually about 90% accurate. We can predict how many people will be on the platforms based on the weather conditions as well, public holidays and concert information. And now we're actually looking at more like automatic operation responses, right? Like, we know it's gonna rain tomorrow, this is what you should do. So there's no human decision involved. Like, automatically someone can just go, okay, send those buses, right? Send those trains, put more trains, right, on the track. Okay, so based on that kind of story where the idea was crowdsourced and the whole idea went through an innovation cycle around the initial kind of inception to productization to operation, it's like there are some principles that we can summarize. So when you have kind of these conversations, trying to convince whether the executives or if you are a decision maker and you're trying to convince your developers, I think these principles can help a lot to kind of drive that sort of decision forward. Well, let's think about that wall of frustration, right? It's actually broken down, and we've seen this time and time again, where because of serverless technology, it's actually not solving infrastructure problems, right? You think about VMs, and you think about containers, it's about the infrastructure. Whereas if you think about like serverless and kind of data and AI, it's directly solving business problems to the extent that a business person can actually solve the problem themselves. And we have a product owner called Matt. Oh, wrong way. So a product owner called Matt, we call him Matt because his name is Matt, and he actually solved the problem himself, right? The customer had a direct need, and he said, look, I want to just do it myself, and he did it in 4 ways using serverless. And that became that kind of driver, that broke down the wall, and the developer saying, that is exciting, I want to help you. Let me help you with my knowledge around continuous delivery pipelines and automation, and so that, can you please stop doing ClickOps? Right? But the point is that he managed to get that solved, and then now he's also kind of pushing the innovation team to kind of experiment with more serverless that he can take into a product, and then the kind of engineers and the operation people can further commercialize across like the entire company globally, right? So while it might start small, it has the potential to scale globally, and a lot of the global enterprises is actually very powerful. I think this is pretty self-explanatory, and it's been talked a lot in other kind of conferences. The concept of FinDev is that business model, right? So to disrupt, you need to change your business model. I think Brett touched on the fact that in terms of traditional businesses, in terms of bureaucracy and sustaining a product, because that product is probably not making that much money, you just want to fix costs, right? You don't really care. Like Lambda, I don't care, I just want to fix costs. But if you are tapping into a new market, that market can exponentially grow. And then what happens, right? So you actually want a variable cost. And if you have a variable cost, I think a lot of times, like as technology, we focus on the cost when we have this business conversation, but you do realize that as a CFO, they do care about the value proposition to the customer, right? You as customers, you want to pay per cost as well, per use. Imagine if you can pay, for movies, for tickets, for everything per use, right? You don't have to pay for subscription. You don't have to pay for subscription to subscribe to Netflix, right? That's actually a very powerful proposition. And imagine scaling that out to larger kind of organization where they'd be kind of dealing with entire cities, right? When it comes to variable cost and variable pricing, it's actually a very powerful proposition. And that's what serverless FinDev enables. To my point around the fact that you trust the product based on the user experience. So if you look on your left-hand side, you got WeChat Pay and you got Beam It, right? Due to the user experience, it's so easy. You just trust it. It just works, right? On the right-hand side, there's a bank called Legacy Bank. It's actually a real bank. Legacy Bank, where they just converted paper into digital. Like, it's the same paper process, the checks and paper accounts. I personally wouldn't trust that, right? So how do you deal with that in the enterprise environment, once again, is that you don't have to start from scratch. First principle means that you have to be prepared to start from scratch, but you don't have to, right? So if you have legacy that works, just put a layer of serverless. We call that the anti-corruption layer. And then just, whatever happened in the legacy world, everything's caged. And if the legacy is actually broken down, you can actually give the user a meaningful response. And you can build that digital-first user experience to your actual front-end users on top of this serverless architecture. So serverless actually meet all of our needs in this challenging environment in building business value to our end users around the fact that you can scale, you have maximum leverage, right? With minimal effort, you can leverage to the entire globe. You have FinDev economics, and you can also drive very powerful UX through abstracting out the legacy. Now let's get to the good. So who knows business value? You all know business value, right? And let's get to the powerful bit. All the cloud. No, actually, it's just 2 clouds because I ran out of time. What I'm going to show you is basically, back in the day, I wrote a Lambda benchmark last year, and it became very controversial because it said that .NET is actually pretty good, and everyone's like, how dare you? But I thought, why not make it a bit more controversial, right? Get all the 4 clouds involved. But I ran out of time. I only managed to get to AWS and GCP. But at the first glance, there's actually a lot of runtimes kind of supported by AWS. So far, AWS is still the most kind of widely supported in terms of runtimes. Using custom, you can also have a custom runtime using layers. With GCP, it's a bit limited, but I think with every one of these providers, there's always a kind of what's called a clusterless container service, right? So it's basically kind of serverless for containers. And and if you want to check out the code is on GitHub, and my original article is also available. So let's look at the numbers. So what I have here is, I managed to highlight all the kind of the same language across AWS and AWS, that's wrong. It's been to AWS and AWS Go here, and then Node with GCP Node here, and you can't really see the rest. Yeah, but I haven't actually been able to draw any black and white conclusions from this, to be honest, because the minimum kind of milliseconds latency is about the same. It's all about 19 to 20 milliseconds. The medium is about the same, it's around the 30 mark. What does differ is this maximum latency, which is Ruby. No surprise there. So if you're like if you're kind of in doubt about whether you should use Ruby, you shouldn't. So so if we look at the graphs, in terms of the maximum, there's a few spikes, but if you look at the actual behavior of these sort of the code starts leading to that sort of latency, it's actually not that much difference, right? So under the hood, I think there's the different providers are obviously kind of working their hardest to try to make this a seamless experience for all the developers and folks using this for mission critical systems. All right, is there life after serverless, right? Will serverless drive the dystopia of cyberpunk? And will Robert Downey Jr. use serverless nanobots to clean up the planet? Thank you.